Fatherhood really is leadership. It's establishing the vision, it's communicating it right, it's modeling that behavior. Maybe even going a step further is having metrics.
Kids that develop self-confidence, they're pretty tough to beat. They don't become drug addicts. They don't become very promiscuous. They don't get into all the trouble that kids without self-esteem do.
The children raised by single fathers actually ended up doing pretty well. The ones from single mothers, a lot of them were disasters.
When you take a look at men in prison, for example, 70% of the men in prison today have had single moms. Most rapists were raised by single moms, most murderers. So I think there is a very, very important role that men play. I think it takes not just two strong parents, but it takes a village.
It's an interesting question. What is the role of a father? What do we do? Welcome to the Best Half Show, still the leading #1 standing podcast on the internet, dedicated to the idea that the second half of your life could be 10 times better than your first. And today we're going to talk about the most difficult leadership challenge that we've had. And that is not staying away from meat. You should still, I think, it is parenting, it is fatherhood in particular, and I think it's getting harder and harder and harder. But what a rewarding challenge. We've certainly had our ups and downs. We've had our mistakes as fathers. We've had some wins. We've had some losses. I think we're going to share some of what we've learned. We're going to maybe share a couple stories of our successes and our stumbles, and hope this is going to be something for everybody to resonate with, with some of what we've been through and maybe go a little bit deeper. Yeah.
So welcome to the Best Half Show. Today's topic is probably the most important one that we're going to talk about. It's probably the one that's brought us more joy, more pride, but also the most pain. So it's like the highs are really high as a parent, but the lows are really low. So as a disclaimer, there are far more qualified people to talk about parenting than us. But we do want to give a perspective of entrepreneurs and as fathers, because it's very different. Most of the experts are women that have written books about parenting. A lot of the top people are women. I think men have a very different perspective, and I think specifically for sons, raising sons, I think we definitely can speak more about that as well.
Certainly can. I do have a son. He's actually here in the studio with us today and helping with the editing and whatnot. But I think both for sons and daughters, I think fathers really do play an important role. It's worth saying, there's a chorus of voices out there that's saying that men are no longer required. You can have a single mom and she can do just a fine job of raising a child. I'm sure some can, but I think it's challenging.
The stats are pretty staggering, Mark. That's not true. So when you take a look at men in prison, for example, 70% of the men in prison today have had single moms. Most rapists were raised by single moms, most murderers. So I think there is a very, very important role that men play. And I think that when society tells women, oh no, you can just, make your own baby in a test tube, it's going to be fine. It's not. I think it takes not just two strong parents, but it takes a village. It takes grandparents and aunts and uncles and teachers. It really does. So I think the idea that you can have a child by yourself, I mean, good luck. It's really hard just with two parents.
Yeah, no, I think it is hard. I think it speaks to what the role of father is. I remember seeing in a comment somewhere from a teacher saying that, his experience, the children raised by single fathers actually ended up doing pretty well. The ones from single mothers, a lot of them were a disaster. So it's an interesting question. What is the role of a father? What do we do? I don't know. What's the definition? What's our role?
So I go back to cavemen, and I think that, the DNA that we have today is no different, really. It's about 99% the same as the cavemen. So I think the father's role is to protect the family, to make sure that the family is taken care of. There's food. It's the basic needs. I think the father's responsible for the basic needs, and sometimes that involves hunting and killing. And the mom's role is more nurturing. So unfortunately, as modern a society we have, I still think that the primary role of a father, goes back to that caveman role.
Right. But once we get past the provisioning aspect of it, I think fathers play another important role. Again, I see fatherhood as leadership, right? And what is leadership? Like, what do leaders do? We run companies too. Well, first, I think it's about setting a powerful vision for the future, right? Leadership is all about, well, you have leaders and you have followers. Why do people follow leaders? Because they're compelled by a powerful vision of the future. So the leader needs to be able to communicate that, right? And I think that's also true for the family. What is the vision for our family? What is the vision for our children? What would we like them to accomplish? So I think the leadership actually starts with the co-parent and getting on the same page with what it is that we want to do. And then, of course, providing leadership for children, in many cases, even when they're very small and, they have all these wants and needs, and they want their candy bar and they want their video game and whatnot. How do you provide a powerful vision for them? And then, of course, a good leader has to also model that behavior, right? How many times do you see a CEO who says something, they have all the great placards on the wall, but they don't themselves live up to that same thing? So that's probably I find one of the most difficult things as a father is that we have to model the behavior that we want. So it's pretty hard to go and, nag your kids to get off their phones and other devices. And then you're on your phone all the time.
Yeah.
You're not really modeling that behavior, very well. So I think, fatherhood really is leadership, is establishing the vision, it's communicating it right, it's modeling that behavior. Maybe even going a step further is having metrics, right? A lot of, it's one of the things that I have in my family is there actually are metrics for success. Like, how do we know we're on the right track? A good leader is going to have objectives and key results, right? It means that kids are doing well in school. It means that they have an active social life. I think there's something special, which I think we're going to talk about these days, about distractibility, which I think is a special thing that now in our modern age is a big problem.
It's huge.
Where you have just, exogenous dopamine everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's so hard for us to stay on a straight and narrow, but our kids, it's really, really difficult. And I think we have a role to play as parents in helping on that.
So, Mark, what I would say is the first role of a father is to find the right partner. Yeah. Because if you get the partner wrong as a parent, you've really, it's going to be an uphill. It's going to be an uphill grind. It's going to be really hard. And I think once you find the partner, to make sure that you're on the same page. So I know people often have, prenuptial agreements, which is great financially, but I actually think people should have a parenting agreement that spells out things like, hey, I don't think that the kids should have cell phones until they're teenagers. Yeah. We know now the evidence is very clear. Social media is destroying our kids. Mainly for girls, it's social media. For boys, it's porn. These are all the things that we're giving access to young children. But imagine if we had a parenting agreement that spelled some of these things out. I think getting on the same page is super important. And the second thing I think is important is getting the education. If parents every 5 years had to get educated, hey, from 1 to 5, we're going to take the training on, what do we do with kids 1 to 5, and then 5 to 10. And like right now, I'm doing some education on how to deal with teenagers. It's a whole other world. So I think these are things that you've got to get a partner on board with, because look, no one really knows what they're doing. Our parents don't know what they're doing. Their parents don't know what they're doing. And that's why we have a lot of messed up people right now. Yeah. And I think we can all do better.
So do you think that would have worked? Because you didn't do that. And I didn't do that.
Correct.
We all sort of rush into these things. We have kids and maybe we crack open Dr. Spock's book, when the baby's really small and whatnot. And maybe we read occasional magazine article, but we didn't do that. Right? Would that actually work with you and your ex-spouse?
I think if we had agreed on some things. So for example, when we had our kids, the Crackberry was out, the Blackberry. And I was addicted to email, which I broke that addiction.
Okay.
But just as I was breaking that addiction, my ex-wife really got into like her Crackberry and was just on it all the time.
Yeah.
So when the kids are growing up, they could see mom like on the Crackberry all the time. And it's very hard to tell kids to do something you're not doing. And then we didn't align on the same rules against social media and iPhones. Okay. I think if we were on the same page, it'd be vastly different. Okay. And even now, things like if we could agree on why sleep is so important, probably the number one thing in health. But if both parents don't agree that going to bed on time or a certain time is the right thing, it's a challenge. That's what kids are suffering. They're up all night. They're exhausted. It's a real epidemic.
Yeah, it's interesting to see if that would work. Like, in my case, I actually got a parenting coach. So I did have a parenting coach. He was actually an autism specialist, but he said a lot of his techniques work for other people. And it's something that when I started really wanting to work with my son, I got this guy who actually was great. But what was interesting is I ate this stuff up, man. I have a binder this thick and I used to review it all the time, not just because it helped me be a better father, but it really helped me be a better leader in my company.
Right.
It's amazing how many, and I'll talk about this a little later, how many principles that work for 8-year-old boys actually really work for people who are addled by constant inbound stuff in the workplace. Actually found it to be really powerful. But there's definitely a difference there between sort of me diving in and, you know, her not diving in. So again, I think that's why leadership is important. If there's one thing that I think that I did do well from a leadership perspective was I did have a definition of what success was that she bought into.
That's huge.
And that was that our job is to to create independent adults.
Yeah.
That's it. It wasn't to like make sure that they're going to be coddled all the time. It's like our vision is they're going to be independent adults. That means they're not going to be dependent on us. They're not going to be dependent on the government. They're not going to be dependent on their spouse, right? That they were going to be able to have everything that they needed in order to be successful. And that was great. Just even having the vision alone.
That's huge.
I think was really great.
Yeah. Getting on the same path. So let's talk about if you're not on the same path,
okay,
and you still got to raise kids, and maybe the co-parent doesn't always agree with you,
right? Or maybe the co-parent, you're right, she's not there,
right?
With
but
you,
I think as fathers, we've got to demonstrate, you know, what it takes to be a man, and I think we have to teach our kids what it takes to be successful. Right. And I think sometimes moms are far better at empathy, and you know, if you hurt your knee, you know, they're much more coddling, and that's super important. But I think our job is to build self-esteem, and self-esteem comes from our kids actually doing something.
Yeah.
So it's not just by telling them how great they are; it's getting them to do the things that create that self-confidence.
Bingo. I think that's huge. I learned that from Jonathan Alderson, the parenting coach, and he told me, you know, just start doing things with your son. So we actually started playing poker. I taught him how to play poker. He actually became quite an excellent poker player.
That's cool.
And all kinds of things. I brought my devil sticks today, which is another thing that I got. Say, hey, let's try this. See if you can do this, right? What he says is actually doesn't really matter what that thing is. But the thing about self-esteem is you can't fake it. You can't, they have to legitimately be good at something.
Yeah.
And I think for boys, sports, I think is very important. Boys and men bond over sports. So it's great if they, you know, I lived in Singapore, which, you know, has kind of infamously short and skinny kids, you know, it's become a fencing powerhouse. Wow. And one of the reasons why was because it's just something short and skinny kids can do really well. And it's there as a vehicle to build their self-esteem. Yeah. You know, and chess might do the same thing.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It doesn't matter what it is, but you know, each of us, each child has to be good at something. And once you find your thing, that's where the self-confidence comes from. And I know that kids that develop self-confidence, they're pretty tough to beat. Yeah. You know, most kids that have really high self-esteem, self-confidence, they don't become drug addicts. They don't become very promiscuous. They don't get into all the trouble that kids without self-esteem do.
It's a great point. Yeah. So that probably the first big point is naturally, organically build self-esteem in your kids. Yeah. And I do think that's something that I think a father can do really well. I think it's something that they could take a step back because they're not so much into details, I think. Of parenthood. They're not in the details so much of the scheduling and making sure that the basics of, you know, that they're fed and that they're, you know, sleeping on time. Generally, you know, a lot of dads are working hard. They're thinking about their career. But I do think that's one of the things to say is, what can I do this week to naturally, organically build my child's self-esteem? I think that's something that they could do.
That's a huge one, because I know if you get self-esteem right, you eliminate about 90% of the problems that could happen. And the next one, I think, again, these are very basic, but I think sleep habits. You know, getting everyone in the family going, hey, this is the bedtime we've arrived at. Here's why. And we all actually do
that's easy said, though. I mean, how many times I don't know about your children, right? But I mean,
it's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, they're up pretty late. One of the things that Dr. Alderson recommended to me, which we don't do, is it's easier in the summer, is, you know, your son should get 2 hours of exercise a day. Right. Which naturally makes them hungry. Right. And naturally makes them want to sleep. But good luck, you know, when you're in northern climes, it's not easy to do that. Yeah. But yeah, again, that's easier said than done. So what do you do when their children are not compliant, which is most of the time? Yeah. And I can tell you what Dr. Alderson, probably the best advice that I got. And this works great for adults. It works good for ex-wives. It works good for everyone, which is number one, you need to have a firm boundary. Okay. Right. So here's a simple example. Child doesn't like to go wash their hands and they come in from the outside. Say, look, you have to wash your hands. No ifs, ands, or buts. However, you can use the grapefruit soap or you can use the peach soap. You can have the water cold. You can have the water hot. There's lots of options. Okay, but it's non-negotiable to go wash your hands. So you set the firm boundary, but you don't tell, because nobody likes to be told what to do. Right. You don't like to be told what to do. That's why you're an entrepreneur. That's why I'm an entrepreneur. Yeah. But we don't mind having a goal to hit, whether we set them ourselves or boards of directors set them. We need to double sales. Right. We don't care how you double sales, right? We want you to double sales. We want you to do it in an ethical way. Yeah. We want you to do it in a way that's going to make us proud, right? Yeah. But you need to do that. So provide options, but have a firm boundary, and then always reward the behavior. And you reward the behavior by saying, you took a great step today for your own hygiene, for your personal health, whatever. Yeah. You don't reward them that they were compliant for you. Right. You reward them that they took a step that's in line with our collective vision for where you want to go. Yeah. And that's probably one of the most important things that I learned, again, not just for parenting, that actually changed my whole style of leadership, where I just completely stopped telling people what to do. Right. We just said, here's the metric. Do you want to know why we have this metric? Let's go talk about why we have this. Let's go talk about why hand washing is important. Yeah. Let's go talk about why doubling sales this year, why that's important, why it's feasible. But then it's like, I want you to tell me how you think you can get that done. And so probably one of the most important things I learned, and it's really great for compliance because again, kids don't like being told what to do. So about the sleep, what I would do then is I'd really focus on why the sleep is so important. And then say, well, how can we get this done? What are the different options? Like sleeping at 11 o'clock or earlier is non-negotiable. What are the different things that we can do in order to make that happen? And that should really be ideas that come from them, and you kind of discuss that together. And I think that's actually great parenting to do that well. I think it's a great idea. I know that, and I've been unsuccessful at this. This sleep problem is a real issue, but communicating with their friends' moms, I found has been helpful because what happens today is kids are up all night because they're Snapchatting each other, they're messaging each other. But when you make the other moms aware that, hey, did you know that the kids are like messaging till 2, 3 in the morning every night? Like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, hey, let's work together on this. Because it's an addiction. I mean, this is a dopamine addiction that everyone has. Adults can't deal with it. Certainly kids can't. It's a serious issue. It is. So what do you do? So your kid's on the phone all the time. What do you say to the kid? So I do my best to try to get that phone away so we can actually have a conversation. Do you say get off that phone? Sometimes, yes. Yeah. Sometimes, or do you say, don't do that? Don't do that. So this is very normal to do that. And so one of the things that I learned, this is actually a pretty huge revelation that he taught me, which is that when you tell somebody don't do something, they mainly hear the something, not the don't do. Right. It's actually something that our brains do. Yeah. So what I learned is negative commands. Exactly. So you appeal to the positive stuff. So for example, with the phones or with the sleeping, again, we have a vision for where we want to go, right? Yeah. So like in the case of my son, he's actually very ambitious. He wants to be a big success in life. Right. And that's a great thing to appeal to. Yeah. You want to be somebody that is going to be successful. You want to take lots of holidays. You want to drive a Bugatti. And a blue Gotti, which is a blue Bugatti. So that's what he's going to drive. How are we going to get there? Like, what's the path to get there? Right. And so another thing too, like with respect to getting a co-parent on the same page is saying, what do we want for our child? Like, what's our vision, our positive vision? Right. So instead of saying, don't do this, or you never do this, or whatever, like harping on a negative, and typically it's the women that nag a lot, right? Yeah. It's more appealing to the positive side, which is, you want to be a success, right? We want to have a successful child. How do we appeal to the positive side? So yes, you write down all the positive attributes. So as opposed to saying, well, I want him to stop being an asshole, right? It's like, I want him to be kind, right? I want him to be generous. I want him to be thoughtful, right? Which are positive things. And then you reward the positive behavior. It's like, thank you for being so thoughtful. with what you did. You were so kind today. You provided so much effort. Everyone knows now with Carol Dweck and saying, you reward the effort, not so much the result.
That's right.
But, you worked really hard. You had great effort. You reward that. And even when they don't do that, you still appeal to the things, I see better things for you. I see a great leader in you.
Right.
And the behavior that you had today is not great leadership, right? It's the opposite of that. I think you can do better. I see so much more in you, right? I believe in you. I think that's really powerful.
Dr. Becky talks about that. Yeah. It's really important. So one of the challenges that I think we have as parents today is kids don't even realize why they can't sleep. A lot of adults don't even realize why they can't sleep. They don't realize it's a dopamine addiction. They don't realize they have so much caffeine in their system. If you look at the drinks that the kids are drinking now, the amount of caffeine in there is unbelievable.
Yeah. Caffeine and sugar is unbelievable.
Right? It's just sugar and caffeine, which is the highest ever recorded in human history. And then we wonder why kids are bouncing off the walls all day, right? So again, just educating people about, caffeine, and let's think about their diet. And then, average kids, 70% ultra processed food now. That's the diet.
Yeah.
Well, when you have an ultra processed food diet, it's really messing up your mental health.
For sure. Yeah, and I can say that for sure. My son loves sugar and carbs and whatnot.
We all do.
But I think he has a lot less now. He has a lot less, and I think part of it is that he actually cares about his health. Again, part of the vision, part of it is educating him. And, that's maybe where your social media is not all bad. He's actually learned a lot on TikTok. It's actually quite positive on this front, right? There's stuff on why sugar is bad, why caffeine is bad. I'm sure this is probably more bad than good on TikTok.
Yeah.
But again, I think appealing to that is what kind of person you want to be when you're 18. Do you want to be fit? Do you want to be strong? Do you want to be, magnetic? Do you want to have charisma? You want Riz? That's a word right now.
Yeah.
You want Riz when you're 18? You want to be attractive for people? Well, it starts with your diet. And then it starts your activity, right? All the activities that you do. You can't actually drive your results. You only have your activity. If you have high quality and quantity of activity, you're going to do well, right? So
I listened to a podcast. One of the people he's one of your investors at Chamath.
Yeah.
So my favorite podcast that I'm religious to. It's actually one of the reasons I want to do this with you, Mark, because I was so inspired by their podcast. And Chamath was talking about his son. And he was really struggling in school, having a hard time, diagnosed with ADHD. And of course, every drug wants to put you on SSRIs that don't work. And he said, no, let's see if we can take him off of these electronic devices. And he said in 1 month, it was a profound change. Went from C student, B student to 80s and 90s just by removing those electronic distractions. So it's amazing. And of course, doctors don't do that. They just put you on drugs.
Yeah, it's a sad story. I mean, we don't have the space here to talk about SSRIs and how bad they are and the sordid history of them.
Right.
I don't think it actually ever worked. I think the war on serotonin is terrible. It's really dopamine is the problem.
Right.
And we're treating dopamine addiction with cutting off serotonin, which is doing a great job in creating serial killers and all kinds of other problems. So I have personal experience with that. I actually had some experience homeschooling my son, which is quite interesting. And one of the things he did is change the diet, limit the electronic devices.
Yeah,
it's still hard, but it definitely makes a difference. I struggled with it. I think every parent does. I think part of the problem is that it really is their lifeline. It's the way they communicate, right? It's not like when we were kids. So I found that you just can't restrict it altogether because it just completely kills their social life. So I don't think that works. I really don't think it works. I don't think I know there are a lot of parents out there that have very timed, say you can only use it from X to Y and whatnot. And you can do that. At the end of the day, I think you kind of need an internal locus of control, not external. Ideally, you build something in kids. I do have that with my daughter where she, every now and again, wipes her phone. She just deletes everything on it. And then eventually she puts it back, adds things back on. Yeah. She does it herself because she knows the thing is killing her. She knows it's getting in her way. Yeah. And so how do you build that in kids where they have that much self-awareness, where they can manage their own issues?
So I think it comes from us. So if we delete those apps from our phone, if we delete the Instagram or the Snapchat or the TikTok, whatever we're addicted to, and our kids see that, and not to say that you could still have it on your desktop, but just, people don't use it on their desktop. You could still, you could still be socially connected on your desktop, but once you're moving from your phone, it's like life-changing. So I think parents, we have to do it, and then we model that behavior.
Yeah,
I think that's the way.
I think it's good. Yeah. And so I think it comes back to providing good leadership. Right. So a powerful vision for what it is you want to accomplish, a path to get to that vision, and then modeling that behavior, having metrics along the way. I think if you think of parenting as leadership, I think it helps. One thing I'd love to talk a little bit, you mentioned education. So I had an issue for sure where I had son is not doing well in school for a while. He's doing well now, but not doing well. You mentioned Chamath's child. Yeah. It's interesting. What is even the role of our industrial education system these days? I mean, honestly, I think it's more something for kids to endure. Right. There is doing well in school is not a guarantee of anything. Right. So I think what I've taught my kids is there's a minimum that we've probably got to hit. I don't know what that is. Is it 80? Is it 85 or whatever? There are some jobs for sure. Like if you want to be, like I was a management consultant, you need to have 85. You want to be a physician, you got to have at least a 92 or something like that. If you want to be a programmer at Microsoft or Google, you need a 95. But for a lot of things you don't. Like Google is now hiring people right out of school. My number 2 hire at my last company didn't finish school at all. He was neurodiverse, but he created a lot of things. So I think my guidance to my kids is to really manage that creation to consumption ratio. You are going to get hired or you're going to get funded based on what you've done, what you've built. What's your portfolio? What have you created, right? So that's one thing that is like, I want you to fast forward a few years where you're trying to sell yourself. What are you going to sell yourself on? Because if it's just going to be your grades, that's not going to be enough, right? Where's your YouTube video portfolio? Where's the app that you've built?
What are you creating?
What have you created? Where's the speech that you've given in public? Those sorts of things. I think, and I really emphasize creation. What have you created this week? I think
the creation's good. So I have a very contrarian view to education.
Yeah.
So I dropped out of Western, started a business, and it was successful. My daughter recently followed in my footsteps. So got into Western, dropped out. Now she's a successful interior designer in the US.
Wow.
And she's doing some really cool stuff in Connecticut and Miami. And she's going to kill it. And that's a job that AI can't take from her. Right. So I would rather my kids go out and learn in the real world and learn skills that, AI won't take from them. Yeah. Because I think that's how you build self-confidence. And through 10,000 years of recorded history, we were almost always self-employed. It's only the last 100 years that we had this idea called job and the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, we're either on the farm or self-employed.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're going back to being self-employed. We all need those skills.
With the gig economy, with the side hustles.
Yes.
I think this is great. This is great. And I think it's a real opportunity for fathers to step up. And I'm lucky. My dad's an entrepreneur. I worked in his drugstore when I was 12 and 13. Yeah. And, I learned a lot. It got me on the right path in life. I'm doing the same thing for my kids now. We're trying to find opportunities for them to really differentiate themselves. Right. And create things and have a portfolio of things that they've done. You're right. It's more than just employability. It's pride. Right. It's like, here's what I've done. Here's what I've accomplished. Yes. Right. It's a lot more than, cramming for some test.
That's right.
That's right. You're going to forget all about it.
I know we've got to wrap up because of our time constraint today. But Mark, if you think about your parents, because you had great parents, I had great parents, think about what your parents did right. And I could start off by just telling you things that my parents did right. Yeah. My parents, especially my mom, I'll start with my mom, always so complimentary. Always building my self-esteem and, oh, you're great, or, just very, very complimentary, even now. And my dad the same way. And I think that also helps, having parents that are your biggest fans, your biggest supporters, because I think if our parents are not our biggest fans, biggest supporters, that could make it, more difficult as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of what my parents did well, and this is kind of sort of classic for Jewish parents. It's why Jews are famously neurotic, but also very successful. Like, it's hard to imagine a group of 12 million people that have accomplished more than what Jewish people have accomplished. And a big part of it was that it was never enough. Like, you're never enough. You could always do more. You got 90 on a test, you can do more. whatever it is, you have got 5 good friends, you can have 7 good friends. You can do more for those friends. You can, like you can never really be satisfied or sit on your laurels. And while that, it's mixed, some people don't do well with that and, end up on a shrink's couch because they feel they're inadequate. And I probably dealt with that, I mean, Tony Robbins says people either feel not loved enough or inadequate. I definitely lean to the inadequate side of things.
Right. Most entrepreneurs do.
Probably, They feel like, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
At the same time, I feel like that was something great that they taught me, that there's always more you can do.
Yeah.
There's always more you can do. Don't blame the external thing. Don't blame, the teacher didn't explain this properly, or this person didn't do what I expected to do. It's like, what they taught me is, you could have done more. You could have prepared better. You could have asked the teacher to explain again. So that's probably the most important thing I learned from my parents.
Just in closing, I wanted to talk about one more thing, because I think it was really important for me, and I think it's important for all kids. It wasn't just my parents doing the job. When I was born, my family had I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment, and that was shared with my grandparents and my parents. So a 1-bedroom apartment is a typical immigrant story, with my grandparents and my parents. My parents were working, and my grandparents, helped raise us. But then I learned as I grew up the power of the aunts and the uncles and my parents' friends, which really became part of the family. So it really does take a village. And I think anyone that thinks that they're going to do this parenting in a silo, just with 2 parents, good luck. It's super hard. So I think we can't underplay the importance of the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles and the friends. Super important.
Yeah. I hope everyone has that opportunity. I've had that opportunity with my family. Not everyone does, but that's good. That's good food for thought. But yeah, I hope that everybody is motivated, inspired to become a sturdy parent. That's a word that Dr. Kennedy uses, and to provide confidence for kids and provide strong leadership and see them do well.
And I think it's the most important job that we'll ever have, the greatest job. So I think we can always do better.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers.
Thank you.